The story begins with a group of adventurers exploring a dungeon. Some of them were injured after battling the monsters within. As they pressed on, one of the adventurers asked an injured companion if he was all right and urged him to hold on a little longer. However, the injured adventurer suddenly collapsed, unable to continue walking. Noticing this, another adventurer remarked on the situation, pointing out that yet another person had fallen. He then questioned how many others had already collapsed and expressed concern that the healers were running low on mana, leaving them unable to tend to the wounded. He warned that if things continued this way, their entire group would be doomed. At that tense moment, the injured adventurer managed a weak smile and reassured the group, reminding them that they still had the Empire's hope by their side, Warrior Vern. Vern reassured the group, noting that since he could still hear their voices, it meant they were all holding on. He encouraged them to endure a little longer, and his words lifted their spirits, prompting everyone to agree and press forward. As Vern observed his companions, he reflected on the state of the party. He realized that everyone had grown increasingly restless. The subjugation team had started with a total of 70 members, but after countless battles within the dungeon, only 43 remained alive. The rest had fallen, succumbing to the relentless onslaught of monsters. Thinking about their losses, Vern felt a surge of anger and frustration. He clenched his fists, determined to shift his perspective. Instead of focusing on the 31 who had been lost, he chose to see the strength and resilience of the 43 who had survived. Despite everyone's best efforts to fight valiantly, they had been unable to save all their comrades, and the weight of those losses weighed heavily on his heart. Vern tried to convince himself that this was exactly what they had prepared for. He reminded himself that everyone knew the risks and had accepted the inevitable losses. After all, this dungeon was one of the 7 great evil dungeons, known as the Primordial Core. Losing comrades was an unfortunate but expected reality in such a perilous place. As Vern wrestled with his thoughts, one of the adventurers called out to him, urging him to look ahead. Following their gaze, Vern's eyes fell upon a massive door looming before them. In that moment, he realized they had finally reached the Primordial Core, the end of the dungeon. It was the culmination of their journey, the final destination of their expedition, and the ultimate test of all their sacrifices and efforts. Vern's thoughts turned to what lay beyond the colossal door. He imagined treasures beyond their wildest dreams, unimaginable riches waiting to be claimed. More than that, he knew it was the resting place of the greatest creation, the 36th masterpiece that had brought humanity into existence. It was also the domain of the dungeon's master, the being they had come to face. As they stepped into the room, the dungeon began to shake and vibrate violently. Reacting swiftly, Vern shouted commands to his team, instructing everyone to form a proper line. He ordered the shields and swordsmen to take the front positions, ready to face whatever threat awaited them, while the mages were tasked with illuminating the area to improve visibility during their battle against the dungeon's master. Moments later, the tremors abruptly ceased. Leaving the group in a state of confusion, unsure of what was happening, the mages suggested spreading light around the area to better understand their surroundings. They warned everyone to remain vigilant and not to lower their guard. As the room brightened, Vern suddenly froze in awe. His breath caught as he took in the sight before him. Standing there in all its terrifying glory was the dungeon's master, the very creature they had come to confront. Realizing the dire situation they were in, Vern commanded the remaining members of his team to retreat immediately, knowing they stood no chance against the monstrous foe before them. However, his efforts were in vain, and the group was completely annihilated. Elsewhere, the dungeon boss, known as Mr. Devourer, recounted the events to one of his subordinates, Pedrick. He explained how the adventurers had entered his domain, only to meet their demise at his hands. Listening to the story, Pedrick asked if it was true that Devourer had been resting when the humans invaded and that he had overcome his exhaustion to defeat them. Devourer confirmed with pride that this was indeed the case. With an air of satisfaction, Devourer boasted to Pedrick about his triumph. He declared that he had faced not one but 2 adversaries, the invading humans and his own fatigue, and he had emerged victorious against both. As Devourer finished speaking, He noticed the worried expression on Pedrick's face and asked why he looked so angry and unsettled, even though all the humans who had attempted to conquer the dungeon had been defeated. Devourer tried to reassure Pedrick, urging him to calm down, but Pedrick's frustration only grew. Pedrick responded with sharp words, stating that there was no way he could remain calm after hearing how his boss had acted when enemies invaded the dungeon. Raising his voice, Pedrick reminded Devourer that, as the dungeon boss, he had a responsibility to remain vigilant. Sleeping while humans fought their way through the dungeon's monsters to reach him was unacceptable. Pedrick went on to express his disbelief at Devourer's behavior, pointing out that yawning in front of the invaders upon their arrival at the lair was utterly nonsensical. He concluded by chastising Devourer, declaring that the real problem was not the humans or the fatigue, but Devourer's own lack of seriousness and flawed mentality. Pedrick, fuming with anger, turned to another companion, Renee, and asked for her opinion on the situation. Renee hesitated before admitting she wasn't sure what to think. However, she added that the fact Devourer had overcome the humans with nothing more than a yawn left her in awe, once again, of his dignity. She expressed her excitement and happiness, marveling at how her boss had handled the invaders. Pedrick, visibly annoyed by Renee's unwavering support for Devourer, sighed in frustration, while Devourer himself appeared perplexed by the conflicting reactions unfolding before him. Feeling overwhelmed, Pedrick sank into his chair, muttering to himself that he should probably give up and resigning to the idea that the dungeon was doomed. Hearing this, Devourer tried to lift Pedrick's spirits, urging him not to dwell on the matter so much. He added with a wry comment that if Pedrick continued overthinking the situation, it would only lead to his bones rotting away. The 7 dungeons that humans had tentatively deemed impossible to raid were collectively known as the 7 Great Evil Dungeons, with Devourer serving as the boss of one of them, the Primordial Core. In most cases, dungeon raids ended in victory for the humans, who could launch their attacks at any time, forcing the monsters to remain perpetually on guard. This imbalance placed the dungeon's defenders at a disadvantage, and the repeated battles gradually weakened most dungeons at an alarming rate. However, amidst the countless dungeons successfully raided and repurposed over time, the existence of a few exceptional dungeons that humans could not conquer was almost inevitable. These were the Great Evil Dungeons, or more precisely, the 7 Great Evil Dungeons which mankind universally agreed were beyond conquest. Among these infamous strongholds, the Primordial Core stood out as the most fearsome. Deep within this realm of chaos and danger, countless monstrous creatures defended the dungeon, while the gatekeeper of the 3 crossroads waited, guarding its most critical threshold. The homunculus guarding the red crossroad to the left was known as Blade Maid Renee, while the skeleton defending the blue crossroad at the center bore the name Death Knight Pedrick. As for the filth-tainted path to the right, little information was available. Overseeing this chaotic fortress was the primordial monster from the earliest chapter of the Empire's mythology, a being named Devourer. Renee closed the book she had been reading and informed Devourer that this was what was written within its pages. She then remarked that, as he had previously mentioned, the book's spread among humans had indeed led to an increase in intrusions. Devourer responded calmly, explaining that managing a dungeon required a certain finesse. He added that wrapping it in a touch of mysticism kept humans intrigued and oblivious to its deeper truths. Devourer explained to Renee that leaking selective information like this was a strategy. By feeding humans just enough details, they would mistakenly believe they understood everything about the dungeon. When humans came across books like these, half filled with fantasy and embellishments, they would flock to them like moths to a flame. However, Devourer admitted that even with this tactic, he had not anticipated humans coming to his dungeon in such overwhelming numbers. He then turned to Renee, asking if there had indeed been 74 humans in the group that had just invaded, as he couldn't quite recall the exact number. Around them, the lifeless bodies of the adventurers lay scattered across the floor, all of them having met their end at Devourer's hands. Renee agreed with Devourer, acknowledging that his strategy was sound. However, she pointed out that most of the gear worn by the humans had melted during their battle with Mr. 116's black tentacles, rendering the equipment useless. She also mentioned that the few items that remained intact were quite expensive. Renee expressed her confidence that had she been in charge of dealing with the humans, she would have been able to handle them without damaging the gear. Noticing the sadness on Renee's face, Devourer, sensing her disappointment over not being able to help him acquire the gear, shifted back into his human form. He placed a hand gently on her head and reassured her that he was certain she would have been able to collect all of the equipment if she had been the one to face the humans. Devourer urged her not to be upset about the outcome, offering comfort in his usual calm manner. After being comforted by Devourer, Renee smiled happily. But in the corner, Pedrick was still fuming with anger. Unable to contain his frustration, he asked Devourer if he was sure they had gathered for a meeting, as it seemed to Pedrick that they were all simply there to have fun. He then turned to Renee and Devourer, questioning why they were the only ones appearing so content with the situation. Pedrick's expression shifted suddenly, brightening as he continued with a sarcastic tone. He remarked that the atmosphere there felt so sweet that just by breathing the air, he thought he might develop cavities. However, he added that he didn't think it would only rot his teeth. His head might just start to rot as well. Pedrick then turned to Devourer, telling him that if he was going to polymorph, he might as well do it properly. He added that he had just caught a glimpse of Devourer patting Renee's head, while noticing that Devourer had 6 fingers instead of 5. Devourer checked his hands and confirmed that Pedrick was right. There were indeed 6 fingers. Pedrick then remarked that it was still better than the last time Devourer had polymorphed, when he had more than 40 teeth. Pedrick recalled with a shiver how Devourer had proudly smiled, declaring that his transformation had gone perfectly, a sight that had sent chills down Pedrick's spine. Renee, clearly annoyed, told Pedrick that his jaw was making too much noise. Pedrick, upon hearing this, thought to himself that if Renee was so disgusted by it, she might as well quit being the dungeon gatekeeper. Renee, shifting the conversation, informed everyone that she would get straight to the point. She explained that humans had finally begun invading the right crossroad. The problem, however, was that 116 black tentacles, who had been guarding the right crossroad, had suffered a major injury and his condition seemed critical. Devourer, however, reassured Renee not to worry too much, as the regenerative abilities of the tentacles were beyond her imagination. He suggested that they wait and see how things progressed, and if it didn't work out, they would simply hire a new gatekeeper. With a bright smile, Pedrick then chimed in, suggesting that if Devourer were to hire a new gatekeeper, he should hire 2 instead of just 1. Pedrick added that this way, Devourer could finally stop being the gatekeeper himself. Upon hearing Pedrick's comment, Devourer asked what he was talking about and reminded him that Pedrick's contract was for life. After making this point, Devourer shifted the conversation and told them that the humans were only targeting his right crossroad. Pedrick then added that the humans might already be organizing a new raid force. Renee pointed out that humans these days frequently used communication magic, like telepathy, so the news about the crack in the rightward filth crossroad might have already spread among them. In response, Devourer raised his voice, telling them that if that was the case, they would need to adjust their plans accordingly. He then told Renee and Pedrick to listen carefully as he was about to explain their next course of action. Devourer concluded by announcing that they were going to switch positions. Devourer then told Renee that since she had been guiding the red path on the left, she would now be responsible for the filth crossroad on the right. He explained that the raid force would likely swarm there, thinking the area would be unguarded, and all Renee needed to do was stop the humans who would come to her path. Motivated and confident, Renee assured Devourer that she could stop any number of intruders that would come her way. Devourer then turned his attention to Pedrick and told him that he would now need to take care of the red crossroad on the left, which Renee had been protecting. Pedrick, surprised, asked why it had to be him. Devourer explained that once the humans realized Renee was on the filth crossroad, they would head for the red crossroad, expecting to find her there. Instead, it would be Pedrick who would be guarding it, and he would be the one to stop anyone who came in that direction. After explaining the plan to Pedrick and Renee, Devourer told them that this way they would be able to stop 2 invasions. However, Pedrick interrupted and asked what would happen if the humans decided to head for the blue crossroad in the center. Devourer, caught off guard and unsure of how to respond, admitted that he didn't have an answer for that. He then told them that if the humans chose the blue crossroad, there was nothing they could do about it, and that the humans would simply have to enjoy a date with Devourer himself. Pedrick, hearing this, questioned Devourer's plan, stating that it seemed like a messy and inadequate strategy. However, Renee, her eyes sparkling with excitement, praised Devourer's suggestion, calling it a brilliant idea. Pedrick, though dissatisfied, reluctantly agreed to go along with the plan. Renee then spoke, telling the others that now that the most urgent matters were mostly handled, the only remaining issue was deciding what to do with the sword. Upon hearing this, Devourer asked Renee what she meant by sword. Pedrick stood up and clarified, telling Devourer that Renee was referring to the sword used by the leader of the raid force. He added that the humans who came to the dungeon this time must have been quite powerful, considering they were carrying such weapons. Devourer, curious, asked them to explain what kind of sword they were talking about. Pedrick, confident that Devourer had heard of it, took out the sword and revealed it to Devourer, explaining that it was the 36th masterpiece, a very famous weapon among humans. Pedrick then sheathed the sword and told Devourer that although the sword wasn't exactly a weapon, its number was 14, and its name was Tannabella. Upon hearing the name, Devourer finally remembered and said that it wasn't a particularly important sword. He added that he bet there were a few of them crammed in some corner of the storage. Devourer then mentioned that one of the blades Renee had right now was also one of the 36 masterpieces. Pedrick, impressed by the quality of the items humans carried, asked Devourer what they should do with the sword. He pointed out that if they gave it to one of the monsters stationed at the entrance, humans would just snatch it back, and if it fell into their hands again, it would cause problems for all 3 of them. With that, Pedrick suggested that Devourer should take the sword. Devourer then asked Pedrick if he would be able to use the sword, pointing out that Pedrick also wielded swords. Pedrick, momentarily confused by Devourer's question, was suddenly filled with happiness. He replied that he had no choice since it was the boss's orders, so the sword now belonged to him. Afterward, Devourer rested his head on the table and reminded Pedrick that now that the sword was his, Pedrick should tear up the resignation letter he had hidden in his ribs. Renee then shifted the conversation, asking what they should do about the remaining income distribution. Pedrick, now satisfied with the sword as his payment, told Devourer that this was enough for him. Devourer, in turn, told Renee that they should handle it as they always had. He suggested using as much as they could on their end and using what remained as bait to lure the next group of intruders in. Renee, excited, told Devourer that she would handle the detailed distribution again, to which Devourer agreed. However, Pedrick was unsure if the situation could be entirely entrusted to Renee. Renee then suggested to the others that they didn't really have much use for the magic tools, and asked Devourer if they should remove the mana stones and sell them to make a significant amount of money. Devourer, upon hearing this, thought it was a great idea. He then mentioned that he might visit the human village. Both Renee and Pedrick were shocked by this suggestion. Devourer, seeing their reaction, asked why they were so surprised. Pedrick, with a worried expression, advised Devourer that it would be much better if Renee went to the village instead of him. Renee quickly agreed with Pedrick's suggestion. Devourer, growing annoyed, asked Pedrick why he had said that. Pedrick explained that Devourer was bad at transforming into a human, which could cause a lot of trouble. Although Devourer was irritated by Pedrick's suggestion, he reluctantly agreed with his plan. He then told Renee that she could go and should buy lots of delicious food for him. A short while later, Renee was standing outside the dungeon, gazing at the sky. She noted to herself that the weather was quite nice that day. With a smile, she spoke to Devourer, telling him that she would be back shortly before heading off to the village. Once in the village, Renee entered a shop where she was supposed to sell the items. The shop owner, addressing her as a kid, informed her that, unfortunately, he couldn't buy the items from her. Renee, hearing this from the shop owner, grew furious and asked him why he couldn't buy the mana stones from her. The shop owner then reached for one of the mana stones he had and showed it to her. He explained that the mana stone he was holding was a B-rank mana stone, adding that commoners needed to work for at least 10 years to afford one. He further explained that the mana stones Renee had brought were all larger than the one he showed her, and as a result, they could only be used by mages from the royal palace or high-ranking members of the Mage's Tower. He suggested that perhaps a jeweler in the capital who had an agreement with the royal family or the Mage's Tower wing might be able to handle the mana stones she had brought. Renee, upon hearing that she would need to go to either the capital or the Mage Tower, thought to herself that the capital was too far, leaving the Mage Tower as her only option. She didn't want to go to the Mage Tower, but she decided that if it was for Devourer, she was willing to make the trip. With that, she turned toward the door and bid farewell to the shop owner. The shop owner, as she was leaving, noticed that there was still a piece of mana stone left on the table. He called out to her, telling her that she had forgotten it. Renee, without turning back, told him that the mana stone was a tip for the information he had provided. The shop owner, watching her leave, thought to himself that Renee was a strange kid. Moments later, Renee arrived at the Mage Tower's wing, where one of the mages greeted her and asked if she had come to sell mana stones. The mage added that if that was the case, it would be better for her to meet with the guild master. Renee agreed with his suggestion, and the mage told her that he would guide her to the office, asking her to follow him. As they walked, Renee observed the structure of the tower, noting that the leader of the Mage Tower was located at the top, and she realized that the Mage Tower was similar to a dungeon in design. At that moment, the mage directed her to come this way, and as she entered, a woman sitting in her chair, surrounded by several mages, greeted Renee. The woman then thanked Renee for traveling such a long distance and introduced herself as Graumitz Amer, the leader of the Wings Tower Guild. Afterward, she asked Renee who she was, but Renee, noticing the significant amount of mana the woman possessed, calmly replied that her name was Renee. Amir then explained that she had heard rumors about a young child arriving, and though she had initially planned to ignore her, the guards had informed her that Renee had a considerable amount of mana stones to sell. Amir had thus decided to meet with Renee. She also mentioned that, being aware of the fame of the Wings Mage Tower, she trusted that Renee had brought high-quality mana stones that matched the tower's standards. Upon hearing this, Renee took all the mana stones from her bag and told Amir to confirm their quality for herself. Amir was taken aback when she saw all the mana stones, as they were all of A-rank quality. To her surprise, some of the mana stones were top grade, nearing the highest tier within the A-rank category. Amir thought to herself that such powerful mana stones were not items a child should possess, and she began to wonder who this young girl in front of her truly was. She then asked Renee who she was and where she had obtained all of these mana stones. As she studied Renee more closely, Amir noticed her silver hair, which reminded her that one of the Empire's 8 noble families was known for possessing silver hair. Amir wondered if this could be the daughter of that family, perhaps having run away and secretly gathered all these mana stones. Amir gave a faint smile and thought to herself that there was no other way such a young child could possess so many mana stones. She concluded that Renee must be unaware of the world's complexities and decided to take advantage of the situation. Amir then spoke up, apologizing for her earlier rudeness. She explained that she never imagined the products Renee had brought would be of such high quality. She added that the Wings Magic Tower would be eager to buy all of the mana stones from Renee. Amir offered to pay 50 ounces of gold coins per stone, with 80 ounces for those in particularly good condition. Renee, hearing this offer, remembered what the previous shop owner had told her, that it would take a commoner 10 years of hard work to afford even one of these mana stones. Renee thought to herself that the average human earned about 10 ounces of gold coins after working for 1 year. In 10 years, that would amount to 100 ounces. With a serious expression, she addressed Amir, warning her that if she was joking, Amir would regret it. Amir, taken aback by Renee's awareness of the mana stone's value, felt a slight panic. She quickly responded, explaining that the guild didn't have enough money to buy all the mana stones Renee had brought, and they could not purchase them all. Renee, her face filled with anger, retorted that if Amer couldn't afford all of them, she should at least buy as many as she could. Amer, troubled by Renee's response, then presented 2,000 ounces of gold, explaining that this was all the money the guild had available. Amer, under the condition of receiving all the mana stones, proposed offering Renee objects equivalent in value to the money Renee had presented. Renee asked if the items were truly valuable and easy to sell, to which Amer assured her there was no need for concern. Amer then invited Renee to follow her, explaining that she would show her the objects immediately. She mentioned that while she usually would not allow outsiders into this particular area, she was willing to make an exception for Renee. They soon arrived at the Mage Tower's storage, where Amer gestured toward one of the objects and explained its significance. It was a tiara adorned with 4-carat diamonds, and at its center were small mana stones, making it especially useful for mages. Amer gestured toward several other objects, describing each one to Renee. However, Renee showed no interest in any of them, and instead glared at Amer with visible dissatisfaction. Noticing Renee's lack of enthusiasm, Amer wondered what might be wrong. She remarked that Renee seemed unimpressed with the selection, and noted that alchemy, being an unconventional and often messy field, attracted many individuals who were not averse to such things. After saying this, Amer directed Renee's attention to a heart-shaped stone, introducing it as the Scarlet Love Stone, a gem believed to assist in matters of love. Upon hearing this, Renee's demeanor shifted entirely. The idea that the gemstone before her could help with her love filled her with excitement, and her eyes sparkled with anticipation. Amer explained that if mana were infused into the gem in front of the person one admired, the spirit within the stone would aid in creating an eternal bond of love. Hearing this, Renee eagerly asked if it would work on anyone. Amer confidently affirmed, vouching for its effectiveness and staking her title as the Mage Tower Master on the claim. Seeing Renee's growing excitement, Amer commented that it seemed Renee liked the item. Renee immediately expressed her desire to have it. Observing Renee's enthusiasm, Amer smiled, realizing she now held the upper hand in the negotiation. She then informed Renee that, unlike the other items, this gem would be particularly difficult to obtain, given its extraordinary power, even capable of stealing the heart of an emperor. Amer emphasized that the gem was extremely valuable. Renee was taken aback, stunned by the realization that she might not be able to acquire it. In a moment of desperation, she made a rash decision. She presented the item she had in her possession and asked Amer if it would be sufficient to compensate for the gem. Amer was momentarily taken aback, surprised that Renee possessed such a valuable item. Renee, however, firmly held one of the 36th masterpiece items in her hands and declared her intention to trade the weapon along with all the money Amer had previously given her for the gem. Moments later, the deal was complete, and Renee succeeded in obtaining the gem before returning to her home. Meanwhile, back at the Tower Guild, a mage approached Amer with a concerned expression and questioned how she could part with the gem so easily. Amer asked why he was so troubled by the exchange. The mage pointed out that Amer knew exactly what kind of gem it was and warned that if Renee left with it, she would almost certainly meet her demise. Amer, unmoved, replied that she did not care, stating that it was merely an item foolishly desired and personally exchanged by a noble lady. Despite her dismissal, the mage remained unsettled and disagreed with Amer's stance. Amer assured the mage not to worry, explaining that no problems would arise. She revealed that the moment the gem's magical power was released, both Renee and the person she loved would die, leaving no evidence behind. As she spoke, Amer admitted she did not know who Renee's beloved was, but remarked that she felt a twinge of pity for them. Elsewhere, Renee found herself in one of the 7 great evil dungeons, Cheat Castle. There, the dungeon's boss, Elizabeth Bathory, stood before her holding a pair of scissors and a comb. Elizabeth commented that the ends of Renee's hair were quite damaged. Renee apologized for showing up unannounced and added that she always owed Elizabeth a favor whenever she visited the castle. Elizabeth dismissed Renee's apology with a smile, saying it was only natural for neighbors to help one another. She added that Renee's cuteness brought her genuine happiness. Elizabeth cheerfully told Renee that when someone was naturally beautiful, it didn't matter what Elizabeth did, they would always look good. Renee, hearing the compliment, felt shy and a bit flustered. Elizabeth then remarked that moments like these made her envious of Renee for being a homunculus, adding that she envied how Renee's youthful and flawless face would never age. Still embarrassed by the string of compliments, Renee replied that Elizabeth's skin also looked remarkably youthful and even paler than her own. Elizabeth smiled and explained that her secret was using blood daily as part of her beauty regimen, which allowed her to maintain such pristine skin. As she finished speaking, Elizabeth completed styling Renee's hair. Renee, now wearing a calm smile, turned to Elizabeth and asked her opinion on how she looked. Elizabeth smiled warmly at Renee's question and told her she was the most beautiful woman Elizabeth had seen in a long time. Renee felt a surge of happiness at the compliment. Elizabeth stepped closer to her and reassured Renee that no one would be able to reject her in that moment, making Renee even more delighted. Changing the subject, Elizabeth asked why Renee wanted to look so good and if she was planning to confess her feelings to someone. With a bright smile and her gaze fixed on the gem, Renee cheerfully admitted that she was indeed planning a confession. Elizabeth was taken aback by the response, her expression shifting to one of concern. She quickly explained that her question had only been a joke and, with a worried tone, asked Renee who she intended to confess to. Renee, hearing Elizabeth's question, confidently replied that she was planning to confess to Mr. Devourer, her boss. Elizabeth was visibly more surprised, her concern deepening at the revelation. With a worried expression, she suggested that Renee might be making an extreme joke without realizing it, and asked if Renee was saying such things simply because she was a homunculus. However, Renee, her face filled with determination, firmly stated that it was no joke. She truly intended to confess to Devourer. Hearing this, Elizabeth asked what Renee could possibly like about Devourer, describing him as a scoundrel whose positive traits were nearly impossible to identify. Renee, smiling brightly, replied that Devourer had many strengths and was incredibly reliable. Elizabeth, still confused and skeptical, remarked with a hint of sarcasm that Devourer might indeed be the most reliable person in the world, though certainly not in the way Renee imagined. Elizabeth added that Devourer's laziness often negated any sense of reliability he might possess. Renee nodded in agreement, admitting that Devourer was indeed lazy, quite large, and had an insatiable appetite. She described how he ate like a pig, slept whenever he pleased while snoring loudly, lacked wit, and seemed even hungrier than usual these days. Elizabeth, puzzled by Renee's words, asked how she could still like Devourer despite all of these flaws. Renee, her face glowing with a bright smile, replied that even with all of Devourer's imperfections, she still loved him deeply. Elizabeth, hearing Renee's heartfelt words, smiled and told her that she understood what Renee was trying to convey. She wished Renee the best and hoped everything would work out in her favor. However, Elizabeth added that she still believed Renee was too good for Devourer. She then told Renee that if Devourer ended up rejecting her, she should return to Elizabeth. Renee, touched by Elizabeth's support, thanked her and confidently stated that she would succeed, clutching the gemstone tightly. Meanwhile, in the imperial capital of Riaz, within the Dungeon Raid Union headquarters, a man addressed the group, asking if they should assume that warrior Vern Hishistalt's raid force had been annihilated. Another individual quickly dismissed the idea, asserting that such a scenario was impossible, as Vern and his team had reported easily defeating the gatekeeper. Another man spoke up, noting that since no corpses had been found, he couldn't believe that all the adventurers sent to the dungeon had been wiped out. A different man stood in agreement, asserting that there was no way Vern could have been defeated by a monster. He explained that the Primordial Core wasn't that difficult or large of a dungeon. However, another voice chimed in, reminding them that it had already been 2 days since they last heard from Vern, and they had to consider the possibility that he and the rest of the adventurers had indeed been annihilated. One man then raised a troubling question. If Vern and the others were all truly lost, what had happened to the Hishitalt family's sword which Vern had been carrying? In response, one of the men explained that communication magic had been cut off once they entered the heart of the Primordial Core, and without re-entering the area it would be impossible to recover the 14th masterpiece, Tannabella. The room was filled with panic as everyone struggled to figure out what to do. In the midst of the chaos, one man urgently suggested that they needed to hurry and re-enter the dungeon. However, another quickly intervened, stating that it was impossible. He pointed out that even Vern's raid force had failed to conquer the dungeon, and to prevent further sacrifices, they needed to abandon the mission. But once again, another man spoke up, insisting that they could not give up so easily. He argued that if Vern had fought the boss monster, it was likely that the monster had sustained significant damage. Another man agreed, noting that it was Vern they were talking about, so he must have dealt considerable damage to the monster before being defeated. At that moment, the man who appeared to be the leader of the meeting spoke up. He reminded them that while they were discussing, the monsters would have likely healed their wounds and reorganized within the dungeon. With urgency in his voice, he told the others that they needed to gather all available forces immediately and finish the job before the monsters fully recovered. The man who was leading the meeting thought to himself that they had already lost one of the 36 masterpieces and a warrior who was highly valued by the royal family. If they failed a second time, everyone present in the room would likely be killed. He also realized that if they abandoned the mission, the furious royal family would likely turn their blades on them. What troubled him even more, however, was the possibility that Vern had failed to inflict any significant damage on the ancient monster, the Primordial Boss. What if the dungeon had barely been affected by Vern's raid force? What if, no matter how many times they tried, they would never be able to defeat the boss? As these thoughts raced through his mind, the man spoke out, declaring that it was impossible for them to attack the Primordial Core. His words stunned everyone in the room, leaving them speechless, unable to respond. At that moment, as the man was speaking, a mysterious figure interrupted him, stating that what he had said was intriguing. The mysterious man wondered why they had come to such a conclusion and confidently assured everyone present that it was indeed possible to raid and conquer the Primordial Dungeon. The man was taken aback, realizing that a member of the Royal Magic Society had arrived. The mysterious man, who was from the Royal Magic Society, then asked the man if he didn't know whose orders their organization followed. The man's thoughts grew troubled as he realized that the royal family had already begun to intervene in the situation. The mysterious man, with an air of authority, then told everyone present that because he was there on the royal family's behalf, they would all have to pay the price for their actions. He scolded them, calling them foolish for not only being complicit in the death of a precious warrior, but also for carelessly throwing away the masterpiece that the emperor deeply cherished into the enemy's grasp. Everyone in the room was in a state of panic, unsure of how to respond. The mysterious man then informed them that even if they all died, no one would be left to manage the Empire's countless raid forces. He told them that the Royal Magic Society had made a deal with the Emperor to save everyone present in the room. The mysterious man assured them that they would attempt to raid the Primordial Core once more. But the man, still skeptical, asked how they could succeed when even Vern had failed to conquer the dungeon. With a confident tone, the mysterious man replied that they would succeed with the help of Nifrim. This announcement stunned everyone in the room. The man, still confused, asked the mysterious figure if he was referring to the product that had caused so many problems. The mysterious man corrected him, stating that Nifrim was not a failure but an undeniable success. The mysterious man then pointed out the problem, asking the man why Vern and his raid force hadn't made it out of the Primordial Core alive. The man was left speechless, unable to provide an answer. The mysterious man explained that the reason wasn't because Vern was weak or careless. Instead, he said that Vern and his team lacked a crucial factor, something that even Vern himself couldn't possess. This was something that Nifrim had, and with that factor, he was certain they would succeed in this raid. Meanwhile, in the Primordial Dungeon, Devourer had just sneezed. As he did, he muttered to himself that he could sense something ominous, as if a great disaster were about to befall him. In that moment, still sneezing, he quickly reverted back to his monster form, wondering if he was coming down with a cold. Moments later, Devourer lay on the ground, telling himself that he no longer wanted to continue. However, he quickly realized that if he delayed his patrol any longer, Pedrick would surely scold him. Devourer thought about Pedrick for a moment, and despite his dislike for the old man, couldn't help but acknowledge how intimidating Pedrick could be for someone as fragile as him. After that thought, Devourer stood up, resolving not to dwell on it any longer. He then remembered that the last time humans had invaded, they had come from the area near the Filth Road. Deciding to investigate, he headed in that direction. When he reached the Filth Road, he saw the guardian of the Primordial Core, known as the 16 Black Tentacles, lying on the ground, badly injured and still recovering. Seeing the guardian in such a pitiful state, Devourer felt a flicker of sympathy, but he knew there was little he could do for it at the moment other than wait. At that moment, Devourer shifted his focus to another matter, the manager of Room 5 in the dungeon, Anthropopago. He recalled from his memories that Anthropopago could regenerate as long as it had a main body and sufficient nutrients. As he observed the monster, Devourer felt a sense of relief upon confirming that the main body was still alive, meaning it would be able to regenerate on its own without needing assistance from him. Then, Devourer turned his attention to a new problem. He realized that the first through fourth rooms had all been destroyed, a situation that he knew would need to be addressed with Pedrick. However, he had a sinking feeling that this would result in yet another scolding from Pedrick. Letting out a yawn, Devourer decided to put off thinking about the situation for now and concluded that he would rest for the time being. Devourer, with a proud expression, thought to himself that while he had only checked the Filth Road and Room 5, he had still done a good job. He reassured himself that Pedrick would probably recognize the effort he had put in and understand that Devourer had worked hard. Just as he was thinking this, an object flew past his head, nearly striking him. A voice followed, calling Devourer a dirty human and telling him that as long as he had entered the dungeon, he should not expect to leave. However, as the figure approached, it stopped, relieved to see that it was none other than Devourer. It was Renee. She immediately apologized to Devourer, explaining that she had mistaken him for an intruding human. Devourer, still surprised, asked if she was the one who had attacked him. With tears in her eyes, Renee apologized once more for her actions, deeply regretful for having attacked him. Devourer, seeing Renee's teary eyes, reassured her that it was fine as she hadn't known, and added that her attack had only startled him a little. However, he quickly shifted the conversation, asking why Renee was dressed so differently. Renee's face brightened at his question, and she happily told him that she was glad Devourer had noticed. Meanwhile, Devourer was in a state of panic. He nervously asked if something special was happening. In his mind, he feared that Renee might have removed the maid outfit she usually wore, possibly planning to quit before Pedrick. The thought made him even more anxious. Renee, hearing Devourer's question, confirmed that something special was happening. She then asked if he could spare some of his time. In that moment, Devourer, still panicking, hoped desperately that what she wanted to discuss wasn't a letter of resignation. Moments later, Renee led Devourer to a special place she had prepared just for the two of them. The room was simple, with 2 chairs and a table set for Renee and Devourer. Renee then spoke, explaining that this was her special place, and told Devourer to sit while she prepared some tea for him. Devourer, still worried, couldn't shake the thought that Renee might be about to present a letter of resignation. After a few moments, Renee returned with the tea and explained that this place had originally been a secret just for her, but now Devourer was also privy to her hidden spot. As she continued speaking, Devourer's anxiety grew, fearing she would bring up the resignation. However, Renee surprised him by saying it had been 80 years since Devourer had taken her in. Devourer, confused, didn't understand the meaning behind her statement. Renee then asked Devourer if he remembered that, and Devourer replied that he remembered it very well. He explained that 80 years ago, as dungeon clearing gained popularity, over 1,000 dungeons had fallen, and the number of humans who reached the Primordial Core surpassed 1,000. During this time, Renee's status had soared, earning her a nickname. As Devourer spoke, still feeling a sense of panic, he told Renee that she had suffered a lot and asked if her right eye was feeling better, while asking Devourer secretly felt relieved that the conversation wasn't about a letter of resignation. Renee, hearing Devourer's question, smiled and told him that she was glad he remembered all of that, including her eye. Devourer assured her that he had always kept it in mind, so of course he would remember. Renee then expressed her happiness that she had been able to keep Devourer safe. Devourer, in turn, told her that it was the same for him. As Devourer said that, something clicked in his mind and he began to panic again. He thought to himself that Renee's words about being glad to have kept him safe were parting words, and he feared she was about to resign. However, in that moment, Renee called out to him and confessed that she liked him, that she had liked him for 80 years, and had waited for this moment for a long time. Devourer, feeling relieved that she wasn't resigning, thanked her for confessing. Still, he reminded her that their lives were always hanging by a thread, never knowing when they might get hurt or die. Renee, hearing that, acknowledged it was as expected and admitted that it had turned out this way. She knew it was a burdensome request, but she couldn't keep her feelings inside any longer. Renee, however, told Devourer that the thought of him rejecting her and walking away was too terrifying for her in that moment. She took out a gem shaped like a heart and with a determined look told Devourer that she had always wanted to be loved by him, no matter the cost, even if it meant resorting to despicable measures. As she spoke, she charged toward him, while Devourer urgently told her to calm down. With a bright smile, Renee extended her hand, holding the gem heart, and told Devourer that with it, her wish would finally be fulfilled. Devourer, surprised by the gem heart, looked at it in disbelief. Renee, however, didn't notice his expression and continued speaking, explaining that all Devourer had to do was infuse the gem with some of his magic, but as she spoke, Devourer's anger grew, and he unleashed his magic in response. This sudden outburst frightened Renee, who was now unsure of what was happening. In that tense moment, Devourer demanded to know if she was trying to kill him with what she had just done. Renee, too scared to speak, dropped the gem heart, and as it shattered into 2 pieces, she noticed something inside the gem. Confused, she wondered what was happening with the gem heart. Moments later, Devourer was in his monster form, lying on the ground, troubled by his actions toward Renee. Meanwhile, Pedrick stood over Devourer with a bright smile and told him that he was the best. Not only had Devourer driven the humans away, but he had also chased Renee off. Pedrick then asked if Devourer had any conscience or if he was even listening to what he was saying. Pedrick, still shocked by what had transpired between Devourer and Renee, couldn't even keep his mouth shut. He remarked that Devourer couldn't seem to distinguish between friend and foe. Devourer, still feeling guilty about what he had done to Renee, asked Pedrick how he could fix the situation. Pedrick, however, told him that it was Devourer's mess to clean up, so he should not be asking for a solution from him. This made Devourer feel even more troubled. In that moment, Pedrick picked up a shard of the gemstone and told Devourer that the situation was not entirely his fault. However, Pedrick's expression shifted, and he added that what Devourer had done to him was definitely his fault. Devourer, hearing this, covered his eyes, realizing he was in trouble. He told Pedrick that he didn't remember doing anything to upset him. Pedrick, upon hearing this, responded that if Devourer continued acting this way, he would make him remember exactly what he had done to Pedrick. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.